So mga kabanatang ipapanood natin sa iyong video ay ito yung interview ni Professor Clarita Carlos. Itong si Professor Clarita Carlos ay naging National Security Advisor ito ni President Bongbong Marcos. At dito ay in-interview siya ni Pinky Webb sa CNN Philippines, no? Sa The Source, no? At sinabi ni Professor Clarita Carlos na dapat daw itong Amerika back up by action. Ibig sabihin yung mga pangako ng Amerika dapat may action, no? May action, hindi lang yung puro salita, mga kabanat. Kasi laging nangangako, lalo ng pangako ng Amerika na tutulungan yung bansang Pilipinas diyan sa West Philippine Sea o sa South China Sea. Ngayon kay meron kasing agawan diyan. At ang inasana, sabi ni Professor Clarita Carlos, backup by action. Hindi lang yung puro salita. Alam naman natin diyan sa South China Sea, napakatagal ng issue na yan. Napakatagal nang nangyari yan. Pero Amerika talagang parang walang ginawa diyan, mga kabanat. Kasi ang daming pangako ng Amerika nung bumisita si President Bongbong Marcos. Nakita niyo, nag-usap sila ni President Joe Biden. At sabi, many aspect daw it not covered by DFA-IRR. So, kayo na kamusta nito mga kabanat sa mga birada ni Professor Clarita Carlos. So, panoorin natin ito. So, video ito, credited sa CNN Philippines.
I'm a real politic advocate. So these are just words, and until they're backed up by actions. We'll see.
Okay, backed up by action. But when also...
Yeah, and they should be, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Pinky, and they should be grounded on some legal documents like the MDT. If they are not there, they're just words.
Nako.
Secretary Austin was also reiterating that the MDT applies to armed attacks on our armed forces, Coast Guard vessels, etc. So if you're saying that these needs to be backed up by action, let's then talk about the release very recently, yesterday, of this bilateral defense guidelines. Is this a good enough backup for statements made during the visit of the president to, in the United States with Secretary Austin, President Biden?
Yes, I read those guidelines, and there are many concepts there, aspects there, which really need to be operationalized. That's the reason why I kept on stressing the need for a sub-IRR for the EDCA, because the ones I helped compose for the IRR for the VFA is not adequate, because there are many aspects of the EDCA which will not be covered by the VFA IRR. Mm-hmm. Let me just show the relationship between the VFA and the EDCA. Remember, the VFA was supposed to be the implementing arm of the Mutual Defense Treaty after the military bases were terminated in 1991. Following that, so the VFA was 1998, and the EDCA was 2014, during the time of the second Aquino, for 10 years. So the EDCA is supposed to be leaning on a further implementing agreement to the VFA. But when you look at the IRR of the VFA, it does not quite embrace the other aspects of the EDCA. That's the reason why we need a sub-IRR. Because if you do not have a sub-IRR, concepts like pre-positioning, rotation of American forces, etc., they have to be spelled out in operational terms.
Mm-hmm. They have to be very specific.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Pinky, do you remember that case of that American young military named Smith?
Of course,
who was
Daniel
accused
Smith.
of raping a Filipina?
Daniel Smith.
Yes. Do you remember the U.S. Embassy kept him in the U.S. Embassy grounds? Why? Because in the BFA, there is a term there called adequate jail facilities. And the Americans raised a big issue about that. They said, what is adequate? Wala namang adequate facilities tayo. So because of that, because there was no operational definition that was agreed upon by both parties, Philippines and the U.S., kinuha nila si Smith and kept him in the U.S. Embassy.
That's
Do you
right.
see why the operational definitions are very important?
Right. It needs to be spelled out So there's no gray area. But in the guidelines, the defense guidelines, let's talk about this first. But I know what you're saying, that there needs to be a sub IRR in the EDCA. But it might be confusing, no, Dr. Carlos, for a lot of people. When we talk about the number one, of course, the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1950, was 71 years later. I believe there was never really a specific defense guideline. Please correct me if I'm wrong. This is the first defense guideline under the Mutual Defense Treaty. Is that correct?
Not quite correct, because the Mutual Defense Treaty, while indeed there are many, many abstract terms there, remember 1951, over time, especially after the exercises now, training and exercises between the Philippines and the military had been going on for quite some time, there had been an expansion of the meanings of the MDT. But the formal review happened, remember, during the Duterte time when he asked Lorenzana to do a formal review? Okay.
Yes.
After that, President Bongbong Marcos asked me sometime in October, I can't remember now, in one of the cabinet meetings, to do also a formal review of the MDT EDCA, because the EDCA was terminating in 2024. And we are required to, each one of the parties is required to inform the other party whether it's going to be terminated, revised, or amended. That's why my study team, which I headed, consisted of the DFA and the DND. And at the time I resigned in mid-January, we had met only 3 times. No? So we did not have anything yet, because at the time, I wanted to see a base, Pinky. Sabi ko, I asked the DFA, kasi sila in charge. Sabi ko, hanap ka nga ng base which I can see para makakita ako ng preposition, equipment dyan para sa HADR. And so I have, through ocular inspection, I have an idea what is happening in these 5 EDCA sites. But bago pa namin magawa yun, ang sinabi ng DFA, wala naman palang mga bases na ganyan kasi wala palang mga prepositioned equipment. In other words, the Americans have not really done anything to the EDCA for the past 8 years. Kasi may October, 2022 yun, di ba?
Yeah.
So it became only important, plus yung additional pa na 4 dun sa 5, only this time because the geopolitical situation has changed.
Yeah. But I want to go back to that, Dr. Carlos. I did read something, I think yesterday, that it was sometime in October, end of October, there was a news report on this wherein U.S. and Philippine officials met to lay the groundwork for the guidelines that should be implemented in regards to this Philippine bilateral defense guidelines. So I was actually thinking about it from then on. I mean, just looking back, it's been 6 to 7 months. And then now, we actually have this bilateral defense guideline. But being talked about since maybe even earlier than October of 2022 when you were still there.
Yeah, indeed. But there was one aspect there which is also important, but which we cannot elaborate on for security reasons. I was not part of that planning, but I knew what was happening there.
Okay.
But at the time, remember, after I resigned in mid-January, the U.S. Embassy, what's her name, ambassador, already announced, I think Tuesday or Wednesday, that there will be 4 EDCA sites. So I would imagine they came out of those talks that you talked about, starting October.
That totals 9 now. Okay. So you said that you looked into this U.S.-Philippines bilateral defense guidelines. Here's the question, Dr. Carlos. Does this solve, answer any concerns or ambiguities in the Mutual Defense Treaty?
Let us say it enhances the understanding of what each one is committed to do. Yeah.
Anything else?
It's simply pushing the explanation for what will now be the nature of our relationship. Because I think everybody knows that the continued aggressive actions of China in the contested waters, they really push us to the arms of the Americans. I like the clip that you made us hear, listen to earlier. I absolutely agree with President Marcos. These bases, these sites can never be used for
As a
offensive
staging point.
purposes. The president continues to support the one China policy. The defense of Taiwan is not in our core national interests, and the conflict between the U.S. and China are their conflicts, and we are not
Yes.
involved in this conflict.
Tama.
I mean,
Tama
let us
yan.
remember, Pinky, these 9 military bases are on Philippine soil. Nothing happens there without our agreement. Yeah, what the president said and declared quite categorically is very, very important for everybody to listen to. And he said another thing which
Dito parang magko-comment lang ako, mamaya na lang. Babalik na ako dito. Markingan ko lang muna.
is also equally critical, that we are not disengaging with China.
Yeah.
Why are we going to do that? You
Yeah.
know? We are not disengaging with China.
Those were two very clear statements. We're not disengaging with China, and these EDCA sites will not be used as staging points, as is the fear of even some senators when they were questioning defense officials regarding the 4 new EDCA sites. So, be that as it may, here's a question, Dr. Carlos. I mean, I want to put a case in point here. Alam naman po natin yung MDT talks about attacks. Hindi ho ba attacks on Philippine or U.S. armed forces,
Metropolitan areas, yeah.
public vessels, land, sea, air. Pero meron ho kasi in the defense guidelines that talked about gray operational tactics. Now, I mean, I just want to put it in practical terms. I mean, I hope you can help us with this. In a situation wherein, for example, April 24, the incident in Ayungin Shoal, Philippine Coast Guard, Chinese Coast Guard, there was a dangerous maneuver allegedly by the Chinese Coast Guard 50 yards away from the BRP Malapascua, or even the other incident in the past wherein this military-grade laser was pointed at members of the crew, rather, of, I think it was also the Malapascua. How does that come into play? I stress, armed attack is defined, no? Is said rather in the MDT. Pero yung mga ganito po, ito ho ba ay gray operational tactics? Ito ho ba ay definitely, one could easily say harassment. How does this now come into play with possible joint patrols with the Philippines and America and other exercises in the West Philippine Sea?
Yeah, I'm glad, Pinky, you introduced the concept of gray zone tactics. Gray zone tactics are really below the radar of actual kinetic wars, no? Yung talagang open assaults. And China is not a stupid country. It's a country of 5,000 years of civilization. And it knows what to do short of war. Doesn't
Right.
want to go to war with us, no? Hindi tayong enemy niya eh. Alam natin kung sino yung enemy niya. So all these skirmishes that you see here would be short of war. But when I was NSA, I discovered may MOA pala between Chinese Coast Guard and Filipino Coast Guard. So yung Chinese ambassador would always come to my office and I would remind him, isn't there a MOA between the Chinese Coast Guard and Philippine Coast Guard? And according to the Philippine Coast Guard, it is your turn to really, enkindle that kind of communication. Meron yun eh. So yung sinasabi ni President ng lines of communication,
Yeah.
they are there.
Yeah.
We only need to use them. And I also discussed, parang 3 weeks ago kasi Pinky, I had dinner, a very long dinner with Wang Zilian, Ambassador Wang Zilian. And I told him, nothing that will come out of this will be good for anybody. I'm sure you don't want to go to war. We don't want to go to war. We don't want to be, in fact, the ground, the staging point for all your wars. You do it in your territory if you want to go to war. And I said, right now I'm writing a book on a regional fishing agreement. I want that to be the basic framework for the contested South China Sea. I mean, ilang handed na ng non-verbal ang binibigyan natin sa kanila. Wala namang katuturan, di ba? So why do we keep on doing this thing? Well, wala namang change ang behavior nila. And surprisingly, Ambassador Wang Zilian agreed. Tuwan-tuwa siya na ginagawa ko yung libro. Why, Pinky? Because we're not talking about, wala na yung oil kasi nag-move na tayo sa renewables. We're talking about fish, food security. At naman yung pinapanganak sa mga Palawan and coastal areas, hinahango niyo dyan sa lugar niyo, hindi nyo na kami binibigyan ng isang isda. So the regulatory framework is really the framework that we want to do in the contested South China Sea and maybe even the East China Sea, yung pinag-aawayan naman doon nila with Japan and South Korea. So if we are able to establish that framework, common fishing grounds, when to fish, when not to fish, etc. I think that is the most advisable, acceptable way now to de-escalate the conflict that we have now. And the fact that China is on board that is already very critical.
I guess, yeah, that's at least one step forward. All right. Dr. Clarita Carlos, I hope we have a part two on this.
So yan mga kabanat, no? Diyan natatapos yung interview ni Professor Clarita Carlos. Tayo nyo narinig yung mga sinasabi niya. So comment kayo, reaction nyo about dyan sa mga birada ni Professor Clarita Carlos patungkol dito sa pinasok ni President Bongbong Marcos. So dito, no? Patingin ko dito parang ginawa tayong pangit, no? Parang sa akin, bagamat kilala, parang hinangahan ng US, pero dito parang ginawa tayong bata, no? Ginawa tayong bata na tinuturuan tayo na wala tayong sariling diskarte. Tingnan mo diyan, no? So, kasundaluhan natin, tinuturuan ng Amerika. No? Kita nyo, pag tinignan mo dito, yan, tingnan mo. Sa part na yan, tingnan mo, tinuturuan tayo ng Amerika na, tingnan mo, na ang pangit tingnan tinuturuan tayo, paano maghawak ng baril? Parang naging tayo parang naging, batawag nito, parang bumalik tayo sa, ang pangit tingnan para sa akin, dapat siguro magtayo tayo ng sarili nating paa para mas maganda tingnan. So, yan mo na mga kabanat, maraming salamat at see you next video.